Hi, my name is James Broome, and I'm the Director of Engineering at a UK-based technology consultancy called Engine. I spent the last 20 years delivering software solutions and data insights, and providing technology strategy and engineering support to teams and customers in the UK, across the Middle East and in North America. Today I'm going to help you ensure that your data projects are successful, that the time, money and energy that you or your organisations are investing in strategic data initiatives are well spent and that deliver real business value. I'm going to describe a different way of thinking, a shift in mindset, and how to approach data projects that puts the consumer and the outputs front and centre of the process. None of what I'm going to describe is complicated, but putting it into practice can be hard, and it might go against a lot of natural inclinations as to how you've typically done things. I'm going to explain why some of those common and long-established methodologies are actually setting up for failure, but how this simple change in approach can reverse that and ensure that whatever you deliver will be valuable. I hope that you find it useful, and I look forward to any questions. While the session is being presented, I'll be available to chat live in the Q&A. I'm going to start with a story, one that I'm guessing is familiar to any of you that have worked on data projects for any length of time. Your business has identified they could and should be using data to make informed decisions about internal processes, about your customers, about business strategy. They want to become more data-driven and set about embarking on creating an enterprise data warehouse or a centralised data platform that will act as a single source of the truth for all your business intelligence needs. And as part of the BI or data team, you've been tasked with designing and implementing this new data warehouse. And you kick off the project by trying to find out what kinds of data you're going to need to get hold of and how it's going to be used. But of course, the business users of the system can't tell you exactly what they want, so they talk about self-service BI and being able to slice and dice the metrics by various different dimensions. So you start designing a data model, a centralised view of the organisation containing all the facts and dimensions that the business might care about. It takes a long time, as there's lots of data, lots of questions, lots of unknowns, and lots of compromises needed when consolidating data from different sources into one logical model. And of course, different business users from different teams have different views on how things should be modelled and what things should be called, so development of the model is slow. The enterprise data warehouse technology that you're using, that naturally lends itself to facts and dimensions tables, is expensive to run. So you have to make some tough decisions on what granularity of data you can store and how long you can hold on to it for. And it's hard to optimise a model for self-service because you still don't know what the exact types of queries are that the users are going to want to perform. But after some months, maybe a year, you get the first version of the data warehouse out into the business. But guess what? They don't want to use it, because it doesn't give them the information they need in the way they need it. But now they've got something to try, they're able to tell you why it's wrong and how it should be changed. But now it's also really slow to make changes, as any updates to the model need to be considered in the light of the whole thing. One team's requests are going to impact another's and vice versa, so the model becomes more and more of a series of compromises, a long way from the perfect view of the organisation. The limitations and trade-offs that have been baked in as you go mean it's hard to explain the rationale and thinking behind some parts of the model, meaning you need to write and maintain extensive documentation and become a gatekeeper for future changes, which slows down innovation with bureaucracy. But eventually, the model, the tools that are used to query it, and the reports that the business has to be generated start to gain adoption across the organisation. Now, this should be considered success, but in fact, by the time you get to this point, you have a data warehouse that is slow and costly to develop, expensive to run and maintain, brittle and hard to evolve, and a compromised view of the organisation. Sound familiar? So what went wrong? The business users of the system can't tell you exactly what they want. This is the core thing. This is the starting point that we accept all too often that leads to the compromised output that we described. And the tools and techniques around data modelling that you're all familiar with in some ways, albeit indirectly, hide this problem from view, because by not addressing that, we're effectively saying, that's okay, because we can design the perfect model that will allow you to query anything you want in any way that you want. Except, of course, that's not the case. You can't do that, and no amount of modelling will iterate you towards a perfect result. By definition, it will always be a compromise. So, we need to think differently about how we help the business users describe what they need, so that we don't have to build a compromise. And we need to frame that need in a way that relates back to the objectives of the business, so that when we help them, we're adding real value. In the rest of this talk, I'll help you with that. I'll help you to ask the right questions of the business. I'll help you to understand why this approach works, and I'll explain how underlying architectural and design choices can fully support this process so that your projects are set up for success. In the story I just told, the business identified that they could and should be using data to make informed decisions. They wanted to become more data-driven. But driven towards what? Decisions need to be made in context. Is the business aspiring to grow or introduce efficiency and cut costs? If it's about growth, is this through organic growth or acquisition? If it's about organic growth, is this through new customers or improving customer satisfaction so you can upsell new products and services to existing customers? Data can help you with all of this. It can help you make the right decisions, but you need the context in order to make the decision. So the first mindset shift is this. Make sure you understand the objective of the business before you start. Why are they investing in this project, platform, or initiative? What are they hoping to achieve, and what is the planned strategy to achieve it? Of course, the objectives may change at different organisational levels, departments, or business units. They may have their own specific objectives either in line with or in addition to overarching strategies and goals, and that's absolutely fine. But make sure that at whatever level you're focusing on, everyone understands these goals. Here's the thing. People don't care about data. They care about what the data is telling them, the outputs from the data. They care about the insights or knowledge or learning. And they care about those things because they help them in making decisions or taking actions, especially when those decisions and actions are tied back to a bigger business goal. So the second mindset shift is this. Instead of asking people what data they need, ask them what they are trying to achieve. Specifically, what can they do within their role in order to meet the business goals? Because fundamentally, anyone's job at any level can be boiled down to a series of decisions to be made or actions to be taken. So we can find out what the decisions and actions are, and we can work backwards from there to understand the insights needed from the data. Let's see that with an example. Let's look at a telecommunications provider that has a problem with customer satisfaction. They might have identified that the customer service call centre is a key business unit that can influence customer satisfaction. So the call centre managers are a key stakeholder in your new data warehouse. How can you ensure that your data platform delivers value to them, that it provides the right insights that will actually help them? Ask them what they can do that will contribute to that goal. How can a call centre manager improve customer satisfaction? They can keep the call queue length as short as possible so the customers don't get fed up waiting. How can they keep the call queue length as short as possible? They can increase the team size for a shift if the phone queues are going to be busier than previously expected. This is a specific action that can be taken that will have a positive impact on a business goal. If you cast your mind back to the original story, we started by looking at the data we had or the data we thought we'd need, and built a model around that would hopefully provide the right information. It was a data-centric, bottom-up approach to building our data platform, and that caused problems. We've now flipped everything around. We haven't even talked about data yet. We focus on actions and decisions that the business can take to achieve their goals. So, now that we have an action, we need to define the insights that will help people know whether to or when to take the action. A good way to think about this is to think about the questions that you might ask. In the case of the call centre manager, this might be, how busy are we now? When are we likely to be busy? Or how busy are we likely to be tomorrow? What would the optimal team size be? The questions help us understand what evidence we need in order to provide the insight that could help the call centre manager with decisions around staffing the next shift. What evidence could we use to answer these questions? There's some obvious ones like the length of the call queue, the number of issues we're resolving per hour. But we could also look at things like seasonality patterns. Are there any external factors at play? Or are there any known or planned maintenance events that might impact the service, causing people to call up? And what about more qualitative things, like customer sentiment? Are they angry or are they happy when they finally get through to speak to someone on the phones? This is all evidence that we could use to help answer the questions, which in turn helps us to decide whether or when to take the action. We've moved away from the data and started talking about actionable insights. If our data platform can deliver this, we already know it's going to be valuable. We've defined our goal, We've identified the audience, we've captured the specific actions, and we've captured the evidence that could be used to support the decision making. But an actionable insight doesn't stop there. There's a couple more things that we need to know. What kind of notification do we need? Does this insight need to be delivered in real time, daily, monthly? And through what channel? People always default to some kind of dashboard or report, but that's not the only option. What about an SMS or email notification? Or an integration into another application? What is the most effective notification mechanism for the audience? And finally, what feedback loop do we need to make sure that the action had the effect we wanted? How can we tell we're moving in the right direction towards our goals? And if we repeat this process for the different types of audience, for the different actions and the different types of evidence, we've started to build out a backlog of actionable insights. And that's the next mindset shift. You can and should have a delivery backlog for your data platform that's broken down into a series of discrete actionable insights. You can now report progress and prioritize accordingly. And that's important, because not all insights are equal. It might be that we don't have the data to provide the evidence. It might be that we have the data, but it's not at the right granularity level, or we can't get hold of it fast enough to support the notification schedule that we need. If we go back to our call center manager's questions, how busy are we now? How busy are we likely to be tomorrow? What would the optimal team size be? What's interesting here is that each of these questions are different. All of them would be useful. And if we dig a little deeper, we can see that each question builds on the next to add a higher level insight. The first question is asking us about current state. It's descriptive. What's already happened? The second question is asking about the future state. It's predictive. What do we think is going to happen? And the third question is asking us for an answer. It's prescriptive. What should we do about it? So you can also get the same insights in different ways and in different levels of sophistication. So you need to prioritize. And there's two axes that are useful here: the business impact and the complexity to deliver. Being able to answer the question, what would the optimal team size be, would clearly have a huge business impact. But in order to do that, you may need to create insights that don't currently exist. We may need to capture a lot more data. There may be sophisticated modelling needed. There may be an element of experimentation to see if this is even feasible, that we can predict that with good enough confidence for it to be useful. So it's probably going to be very complicated. And you might want to throw all your resources at this. It may be significant enough to justify the time and money to figure it out, but you need to make that prioritisation decision in context with everything else. And that's the next mindset shift. By asking the business what they need, you haven't constrained yourself by what's currently possible. Because what's currently possible might not be what they need at all. But now you can prioritise accordingly. And obviously, the best starting point is here in the top right. High impact, low effort insights. That's where you want to start your delivery, as you're now guaranteeing that what you do first will add value straight away, which leads to adoption and further investment. And you just keep going through this process. Discover the insights needed, prioritise, deliver. So how do you deliver it? Where do you start when you have actionable insight number one and you've identified the evidence to answer the first question through the right channel with the right feedback loops? In order to know if we should increase the number of staff on the shift, we said we needed to know how busy we were. And one of the pieces of evidence we identified earlier that would tell us how busy we were was the number of issues that we're resolving per hour. So, number of issues resolved in the last hour is the output that we're aiming for in order to answer the specific question. The most optimal structure of data to serve that output would be a count of issues by time. This allows us to easily and efficiently query the number of issues resolved in the last hour. This means we need to get hold of the issue logs and potentially pivot, aggregate or transform them to be in a time series. And we know that the issue logs can be extracted from our ticketing system. And what we've defined is a pipeline. The only difference is we've worked backwards from the output to get to the data. But that's an important difference, as we know that by focusing on delivering this pipeline, we have something valuable. So that's what we do. We don't try and solve all the problems at once, we tackle them one at a time, always delivering incremental pieces of value to the business. Now, I'm guessing that you've come across pipelines before. They're central to a lot of cloud analytics platforms, for example, Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipelines. Pipelines enable agile, iterative delivery, thin, optimized, horizontal slices through your data platform that are providing specific pieces of value. Pipelines also allow for polyglot processing, so you can pick the best choice in the ingestion or transformation and modeling for the specifics of the insight that the pipeline is generating. You're not trying to design for everything up front, so you don't need to bake in compromise. And because they're aligned to specific pieces of business value, you can also align cost controls and security boundaries to the business units that care about them. And the pipeline pattern scales really well. As you tackle more and more insights and more pipelines, you'll find repeatability and reusability along the way. So another mindset shift, the technology can and should support the process. If you adopt an actionable insights-based approach to your data projects, a pipeline-based architecture is a really effective way of delivering them. For example, the output of one pipeline might be the starting point of another. So rather than a single centralized model, the pipeline-based approach can easily lead to different data representations from the same source to serve different purposes. And we call these data projections or data APIs, reusable data structures that can layer on top of each other to provide targeted use cases with traceability and lineage all the way from the source. Our issues by time data projection that we use to calculate the number of issues resolved in the last hour could also be used for other purposes. We could use it to forecast what this might look like for the next hour, day or week. And we could combine that forecast projection with other data sources, like the planned maintenance schedule, to run what-if scenarios over various staffing patterns, which might result in another data projection. It's normally around this point that someone asks if I'm telling you to forget about star schemas and facts and dimension tables altogether, and I'll be clear that I'm definitely not saying that. What I am saying is a single, centralised, upfront star schema design is, in our experience, going to cause you all the problems that I outlined at the beginning. But building a star schema as an output that's entirely tied to one or more of our actionable insights is an absolutely valid approach. One of the best examples of this is within a Power BI tabular model. If a Power BI report is the correct output to deliver the actionable insight in the right way, then great. But remember, the model in the Power BI report is there to serve a purpose, to deliver a specific set of well-defined insights to a specific audience. You could also think of this as a semantic model rather than a centralised canonical model. So the last mindset shift is this. There are many options when it comes to cloud storage, and you don't always need a star schema in a data warehouse to efficiently store your data insights. Because you've worked backwards from the desired outputs, you know exactly what the optimal data structure should be to support them, so you can pick the optimal storage choice for each stage of the pipeline according to how it's going to be used. I want to show you now what all of this looks like in practice. And to be honest, there's no complex process or technique to follow. We're just talking about asking questions, but asking different questions as to what you might normally be doing. We typically use structured workshops to capture the actionable insights, and there's two ways you could do this. The first way is to cast your net wide and include representatives from different parts of the business in the same workshop. The advantage with this is you'll get contrasting, sometimes conflicting points of view about what's needed, and that's a good thing as it promotes discussion and prioritisation. However, the downside is it's harder to narrow in and go deeper to a specific area if it's not relevant to the majority of the people in the workshop. So the alternative is to have workshops targeted at specific business units, roles, or whatever makes sense for your organisation. You get a narrow and possibly biased set of opinions, but can dig deeper into the specifics of the insights needed. Neither is right or wrong, and you should find out what works best for you. I've outlined a fairly simple process so far to discovering the insights we need to deliver, and we take that into our workshops to structure the conversation. We typically start by setting the business goals. These might be predefined if we're bringing in overarching or strategic objectives, or we might need to understand what they are for that specific group of people. We then want to capture all the people who can help influence these goals. This might be based around personas or roles within the team, like the call centre manager, or there might be specific individuals. There might also be people external to your organisation, external stakeholders, customers, partners, etc. For each person or group of people, we then want to capture all the actions they can perform. What can they actually do that will help contribute towards the goal? In the case of the call centre manager, this was managing the number of staff on a shift. This can sometimes be hard as you're trying to be very specific about what people can actually do in their jobs, and distilling a job role down into a series of actions and decisions can feel a bit impersonal, but remember, the purpose of this is to help people to be more effective. At this point, you should have a list of people and actions, and it might be quite large. So this is a good time to consolidate and prioritise. We tend to focus in on what we collectively think are the most influential actions that we've captured to take into the next stage. We want to dig a bit deeper and want to ensure that we're spending our time on the most valuable things first. For each of those actions, we now want to capture the questions that we might want to ask, like how busy are we now? And for each of those questions, what evidence could we use to answer them? For example, the number of issues resolved in the past hour. These are our insights. They're actionable and they're tied back to a business goal. We've probably ended up with another long list, so it's time to consolidate and prioritise again. This time we can use the axes I mentioned previously, the impact of the business and the complexity to deliver. Starting with the highest impact, lowest effort insights, we can form our backlog for our data platform. More than likely, you'll need to repeat this process again and again. This is not a once and done activity. You may need to circle back to deeper into specific areas. You may need to combine outputs of multiple workshops and consolidate and prioritise at a high level. There's no right or wrong. You can start delivery as soon as you get your first actionable insight, or you can wait until you've got a backlog that's going to keep you busy for the next 12 months. Either way, you should regularly review your backlog to ensure that the prioritisation is still correct and the business need is still there. It all sounds easy, right? Well, yes and no. As I said in my introduction, the concept is simple. We're just flipping everything on its head and working top down instead of bottom up. But putting it into practice can be hard, for a number of reasons. 1. The business objectives that you need might not be clear, or they might not be communicated transparently across the organisation. 2. You're asking people what they actually do in their jobs that might not be able to or want to tell you. And 3. Your natural inclination is to already start with the data, and that's probably more so after you consider 1 and 2. But remember, if you follow this process, you're guaranteed to start delivering something of value right from the start. And whilst the technology absolutely supports the process and makes it easier to deliver insights, as you probably realise by now, none of this is really about the technology. It's all about people. And as you can probably guess, that's the last mindset shift. So that brings us to the end of this session. I hope you found it useful and you've got some key takeaways for how to approach your own data projects. At Engine, we help businesses go through this process a lot. And whilst it might be hard at first, we've seen how effective it can be time and time again. Using the approach that I've described, we built modern data platforms from the ground up, delivering productionized insights that have been rolled out across an organisation in just a few weeks. So we know it works. If you want to hear more about how we could help you, then feel free to drop us a line at hello@engine.com. Thank you very much for listening. If you still have questions or want to connect, I'm still available in the live chat Q&A, or you can find me afterwards in the virtual networking lounge. Thank you.